G'day YouTube, my name's Lance. Welcome to Bundy Bear's Shed. Well, this is the start of a little series we're going to be doing on this engine here. Now, it's a 1929 Farmall regular. The serial number I've got written on the board over here is 45527, and it belongs to a mate of mine, John Dudley. Now, he bought the tractor, supposedly a runner. He bought it in from the States, got it over here. There's a broken conrod cap in the bottom of the sump. So just in chatting, he said, oh yeah, would I overhaul it for him, get it back going, so he's got the tractor he thought he had. So I've agreed to do that. We're going to film it as we go. Bundy Bear's Shed well, I've been a tractor mechanic since 1977, so that's getting back a bit. I should be coming good soon. In the shed here, my hobby is just restoring tractors, and we've got grey Fergies, we've got grey and golds, we've got Massey 135s, and nice John Deere 420 high crop. We've got a John Deere MC crawler tucked away in the pallet racking to get to one day. We've got a Farmall 100 high crop that we'll get to one day, and a few 135s and a few more 35s and things like that. So for that side of it, the Sparex tractor aftermarket tractor parts people sponsor the channel. LSA Oils, Lubrication Services Australia, they sponsor the channel for oil. So when I'm using their stuff, I always give them a bit of a shout out. It's just a kind thing to do. But as for this old banger here, well, we won't be getting any sponsorship with that, you can bet on that. And it's just way too old for that sort of thing. So I believe Farmall House in the USA has some parts for these. We are going to be looking for at least one conrod, probably a set of bearings or rings or something, we don't know. It's got a beautiful brass carver on it, and yeah, look, that's just a nice looking bit of gear. So all that'll be stripped down completely, bead blasted and taken right back to as new as we can get. There's a stand across here. I bought a new worm drive stand to put this engine on, and I'm at the stage now where I've taken the bell housing off and we're about ready to pop it on. But I've come across a few things that I thought, well, it's part of the series, and we'll be right into the nitty gritty having a look at this engine. So I thought I'll just get the introduction going. We'll do a bit of a look around the engine. John couldn't get the flywheel off. Now, the flywheels on these, they're on the back end of the crankshaft. It's a parallel snout for it to go on, and it pushes on, and it has what's called a Scotch key holding it on, so it's just a round key. Now, it had been drilled a bit crooked and off centre, all that sort of thing. So I went in there with the drill and I just relieved the pressure, because we couldn't get where it had been drilled, it was actually starting to mark the crank, so we couldn't actually put a threading cap down in there to pull the pin out, or pull the key out, because she'd been butchered. So what I ended up doing was, in behind the clutch, once you take the clutch pressure plate off, which John already did, where the clutch surface is, there's 3 5/8 UNC holes there. So I ended up last weekend, took me ages to get the bloody flywheel off, but we ended up getting some 5/8 UNC threaded bar, and we pushed it through the flywheel onto the bell housing and kept turning, and it slowly pulled the flywheel off. So we were fortunate there. We do have a lathe and a little milling machine and all here. It's a small lathe, small milling machine, but for the tractors I do up as a hobby, most of the gear is good enough. Sometimes I'm stretching it a bit, but anyway, we seem to get by. So that Scotch key there, that's something we can make in the lathe. Look, they're just mild steel and they just come down the side of the crank down through there. So taking the flywheel off has taken the most time so far. I've got the bell housing off. The bell housing's held on with 8 9/16 UNC bolts, and you can see where the bell housing's been, and the bolts have, I'll see if I can show you that. You can see the bolts are wasted in here. So you've got a fat thread there, then it goes a bit skinny, it's got a little waste in it. So they've been over tightened over time. Who knows, you know, it's 90 years old, this thing, so who knows what's happened. And they would have just been mild steel bolts. So we're going to replace them. I've been downtown and I've bought 8 grade 8 bolts, the modern type bolts. I'll be behind the flywheel. No one will see. Now, for the engine stand, we bought a new 450 kilogram engine stand, so that's £1,000 or something or other. We bought a new engine stand. I've got an engine on one over here. I've got a Perkins AD4203 behind the camera out of a Massey Ferguson 65 we're doing a series on, and I just thought it'd be easy just to buy another stand. So instead of getting it off and on and that. So these are the mounts. They're the mounts that the stand goes onto. So we've been downtown and we've bought some 9/16 UNC bolts, and they're a little bit long probably, but we can deal with that, that's no worries. And they'll get bolted onto the back of the engine, and then these bits here, they just bolt onto the plate onto the back of the stand there. So before we put the engine there, the reason I started filming this bit was before we put the engine there, I've decided to pull the rear engine seal housing off and another couple of things there, and I found a couple of little things wrong along the way. So I thought before we would get right into it, I'll bring the camera up, I'll show you what we've found before we put it on the stand, and then before we start stripping the head off and the bottom end out and all that, we'll get it on the stand and so we can work with it. Now these stands, being worm drive, they're great for filming with, and I make brackets for hydraulic covers and gearboxes and all sorts with them. So hopefully we can turn it over and get you a good close shots of what we're doing. Now I've never done one of these before, don't know what I'm doing. Don't have a book, but I've been a mechanic since 77, a tractor bloke since 77 on the tools, so we'll wing it. If you know where to buy any parts for it, we've come across Fordson House, and there's probably a couple of others, but leave it in the comments, please. Let us know. We don't have a book on this engine, but you know, we probably don't need one. But if you know where there's a digital file that we can email or something like that, give us a yell. We'll try and keep with it if we can. So yeah, I don't know how long this is going to take. I told John if he sent it up here, don't be in a hurry. We're doing a 65 restoration, then this one come in as well, so we're just going to try and work along together with it. So I'll come in close, I'll show you a couple of little things here in the introduction, and then the next time you see the engine, it'll actually be bolted up onto the stand and we can get right into it. So to start with, we've got the bell housing off here. Now the bell housing's bolted on with these these bolts here. It has a gasket. That is the back of your camshaft. So it has had a gasket on it. As I said before, the bolts that go through here to hold the bell housing on, they have been over tightened at some stage and they're sort of starting to waste away. So we're going to put some high tensile bolts in, some grade 8 9/16 UNC bolts, so they'll sit in there nicely. Now apart from the gasket being here to seal the cam up, or the back of the camshaft here up, most of these holes actually go through into the engine cavity, into the crankcase cavity. So all the way. So whenever it goes back on, or back together, we'll be Loctiting these in with some sealant, just so there's no oil coming in around the clutch bell housing, or there's no chance of it coming out. So now this housing here, on the back of the crankshaft, there's a machine surface. Now the crankshaft is slid onto here. That that key that I spoke about, that key picks up one of the grooves on the flywheel, on the crankshaft, and there's another matching groove on the flywheel. Now, there's 2 grooves on the flywheel, but there's only one on the crank. So, and you can see there's a flat on the end of the crank there. Now that flat, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is to give that key clear passage. So if it was round here, you wouldn't be able to get the key off because of the thread. So that's to give that key clear passage. The other one is where the big nut here holds the flywheel on. Well, I thought that this may have been coming over here, but it's not. It actually goes in the flywheel. So it's mainly only to give access to the Scotch key. So the flywheel has 2 holes in it, 2 places where a key could go. I haven't looked at the back of the flywheel yet to see if there's timing marks associated with it, but I do know that I do know where it was on the crankshaft here. Now we've got a spigot bearing here. Now this bearing supports the front of the clutch. Well, not the clutch so much, it actually supports the front of the front gearbox shaft. So there'll be a piece here, there'll be a spline. The clutch plate will spin around here, and this will just give that support. So we'll be replacing that. Inside here, there's a felt seal. So with the bolts undone here, and one thing I did find a bit surprising was that this actually has looks like a ball bearing in here. So where later engines had white metal, of course, but so that's the housing there. Now, for any oil, I suppose I should show you this bit too and explain it all. So there is a ball bearing. That's a ball race made in the USA. I can't see the number on it yet. And this housing here that this one bolts up to, I noticed that the threads don't start until they're down in there further. So I'm thinking, we won't know yet, but I'm thinking that this housing here is a bearing support housing. It's part of this, and this probably comes off. But we won't worry about that until we get to the back there. So what happens is an oil slinger on the back of the crank there. So any oil, crankcase oil that comes through this bearing here, it gets spun out to the side. So it gets flung out in this surface here. So you have a felt there. So you're hoping that the felt is enough to stop any oil that flings out against this little webbing there is enough. So the webbing here has a cutout in it at the bottom, and any oil that comes down through here, through all these holes, you can see a little row of holes, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 9 holes down here. Any oil that gets caught in any of this area here will naturally run down through and be introduced back into the crank, or into the crank case. So what I found with this is whoever's put it together one time, they actually had that all covered up with a gasket. So they had a gasket, this gasket here, where the oil comes down here, it could come into this groove here, but it couldn't actually get into those holes because there was a gasket in the way. So there's actually there's gasket in the holes. So it broke down over time, so I suppose it was getting some. For the moment, we're not going to knock that seal out until we know we can get a new one. no real point. But this had a gasket on it here, and the gasket that was on it, it looks like it was pushing on the back of the bearing here. So my theory is, and I may be proven wrong, is that this shouldn't have a gasket on it. Now, the reason I say that is because if this is holding that bearing in at the back and it's stopping the crank from walking a little bit, you would normally not have paper there, you would have metal on metal. So I may be wrong there, but that's the way I look at it. But you can just see this gasket that's all the way. The other thing may have been that perhaps, you know, I would think perhaps a gasket here and metal on the bearing there. But anyway, who knows? We'll find out. So I just wanted to show you those few things, because you won't be able to see that once the engine stand is bolted onto the engine here. Now, with the bolts going right through here, now some of the housings here aren't particularly thick, and this is a heavy engine, so I'm going to pick up a lot of threads. So we're going to put a washer there to spread the load, and then when we do this bolt up here, I'll do it right up further yet, but you can see that the crank is about 5 millimeters, quarter of an inch in under this here. So the plate on the stand bolts here, so that'll give us a bit of movement. Now if we've got to pull this crank out, and we will, if it has to come out this way, we'll strip everything else out first, then we'll have to take the engine off the stand again to pull the crank out, and I imagine it would come out the back. The biggest bearing would be at the back, not the front. So we'll see, but I'm learning as we go here, so if you know a bit more about this, jump in the comments and have a yarn about it. Yeah, that's what it's all about. So we're going to pick up 4 bolts here, and some of them with the longer bolts, I'll put that out of the way before I wreck it. Some of these bolts up in the front there, even though it's not a really thick housing, it's not that thick, there's room for me to come in the back there with a nut, and I can put a 9/16 UNC nut on the back to support the housing. So that'll be happening. And I'll also be picking castings to put the bolts that have got a lot of bulk around them, so it's not weak to get there. This one here is not a bad one. That's right next to the side wall, so that would be a strong one. So that's about all I can show you just now. When you see this engine next, we'll have it bolted up to the stand. I was going to take this off. Now the lock tab's a bit second-hand, but we can break that piece off, grind that off, and probably find a new section. The nuts had one of those sharp spanners on it, so we'll tidy all that up and get that as tidy as we can, and we'll go from there. So I'll get this engine sitting on the stand, and we'll just see how it's supported and how it feels like that, and then you should have a better look at the engine than just looking up its back end here. Okay, the electrician's just left. It's late in the day now, so I just thought I'd pop up here with the camera. You can see the stand's all ready to go. The engine's on it, but with all the head and the bits and pieces here, you can see that the only place on the back of the engine we can bolt it is around where the bell housing bolted on down through here. So down through there. So it's a bit lopsided, so I've got the gantry here over it until we can lighten it up a little bit and have a go. But yeah, the electrician's just finished. We've got new power points for the parts washer, and I'll just go for a little bit of a walk while we've got you there. So we've got new power for the pressure pumps. We've got new switches in here to run the parts washer here. So yeah, look, we're going pretty well. we'll see how it all goes. But yeah, that's a big tall old engine, isn't it?